Coming to you from the Deep South, this is the Blue Collar Leadership Podcast. High-impact leadership is not reserved for leaders, and it has nothing to do with your position, title, or rank. However, it does have everything to do with your character. It's time to climb to the next level and beyond, personally and professionally. Now, let's start making it happen with your host, Max Story.
Hello, and thanks for listening to the Blue Collar Leadership Podcast today. So today, we're going to talk about, the title of this episode is, When It Comes to Character Development, Focus on Your Weaknesses. And I'm going to get to that a little bit later in this episode, but I just want to plant that seed because we're starting Ria's book today, The Ladder of Influence, 5 Steps for Climbing to the Next Level and Beyond. We've made it up to step 2 on this ladder. And chapter 9 is actually titled The Second Step, Influence Based on Character Development. So as we talked about the first step previously, 5 chapters on that, 5 episodes, talking about control of self. That's a part of your character. It's the foundational component that you got to work on. If you lack control, that's a character weakness. There's always going to be a weakness somewhere relative to your self-control that you always got to be working on. But I ain't going to reteach that stuff. We already talked about that a lot. Now we're going to roll into this entire step. It's more about character development beyond just control of self. So I want you to always be thinking relative to your character. Focus on your weaknesses. And again, we're going to get into that later. So let's dive into this episode. Ria says there will always be room to improve at every level, every step she's talking about. So we should never stop working to master the steps below as we strive to climb to those above. What she's saying is you don't leave it behind. Like right now, we're moving on to step 2. And we're talking about the broad spectrum of character development, which involves a lot of traits. There's tons and tons of character traits. In my book, Blue Collar Leadership and Teamwork, the 30 traits of high impact players. In there, every chapter starts with the word be. And it's about a trait. Like the first one's be growth oriented. That's what you're doing right now. You're being growth oriented. We're talking about the ladder of influence. The second trait in that book is be trustworthy. All the stuff in this, all the stuff on every episode is going to help you be trustworthy if you learn to apply what I'm teaching. This entire book, the series I'm covering right now, is to help you become more and more and more trustworthy as you climb these steps. But you can't forget about the steps you've already covered. Now that we're talking about expanding your character development out into these many, many, many traits that's out there for you to work on. Actually, they're inside of you. You can't forget the one you started on, control of self. And much of that one is going to determine the rest of your character development. Which way do you go? How well do you do the things you do? Ria says character is about more than being good or bad. Character is all of the qualities and values that make up who we are. She goes on to say control of self is the private side of character. It shows up publicly, but there's a whole lot of work you got to do internally. It shows up externally, but the work's being done internally, and that's what she's talking about. It's the private side. And now we're getting ready to move into the big spectrum, the big broad world of character development. There's a lot going on in the public right there. It's still based in your private as well, but it's more related to how well are you interacting with other people. Control of self is about you. It indirectly ties to other people, but it's a you and you thing. But when Rhea's talking about characters more than being good or bad, I probably said this already in this series. I know I said it in a lot of other episodes, but I talk about that right there all the time. Because for most people who haven't really developed themselves and they haven't studied a lot and learned a lot about character, they think that's what character is. It means you're good or bad. That's what character means to them, is a person is either good or bad. But like Rhea said, character is every single thing that you are. How you do what you do, why you do it, what you do, what you don't do, who you do it with, who you won't do it with, all that sort of stuff. Is everything that makes you who you are is your character. You choose to change your values, your character is going to change. It's going to change for the better or for the worse. Well, that depends on what you start valuing, which direction you're going to be heading. So Rhea says who we are determines much of our influence in both personal and professional relationships. You already know that, but you may not have really thought about it. That's why the content in this book is so important, to go through this entire series or go through the entire book if you read along as well. Because your relationships are going to determine, who you know determines where you go. No meaning when I say who you know, it means I'm saying who you have influence with. They're going to determine where you go. Back in my younger days, the people I had influence with, they were not going anywhere. That's why I had influence with them. They were stuck where I was stuck. Till I started growing and developing myself and gaining influence with other people, personally and professionally, I was just stuck. And I was the root cause of all of it, but I was blaming the world, holding me back. Mac was holding me back. That's who was holding me back. Mac Story, the guy recording this podcast for you right now. And Rhea says, as we develop our character, we develop our thought patterns and improve the quality of our thinking. Improved quality of thinking is going to translate into improved quality of choices, actions, results, especially related to our relationships. So right here, when Rhea's talking about improving our quality of thinking, I want to share with you, I was reading this, an old book. I don't know if it's in print anymore. You probably could find it on Amazon. It's an old Andy Stanley book. I think it's been re-released by a new name, or maybe it's been condensed or something like that and given a new title. So there's some portion of it has been made into a new book. Anyway, I was reading the old original book titled Like a Rock, and it's all about character, and it's faith-based. If that bothers you, you might not want to read it. If it don't bother you, it's a really great book. Got some really good stuff. So I'm going to share some quotes that I put in my quote file as I was reading it. I can't share them all because I got a lot out of it, but I want to share some of them with you because there's some really powerful ones in there, and I'm going to speak to these to actually teach a lot of what I'm going to be sharing with you in this entire series from Rhea's book. Before I go there, let me just say one other thing Rhea was saying, and it's the title. It's related to the title of this episode. And I say it all the time. She says it. We don't know who said it first or where we learned it. Been so long ago. Who knows? Doesn't matter. But I'm reading it right now from Rhea's book. She says, in terms of increasing influence, we should focus on developing weaknesses of character and strengths of competency. And see, a lot of people who don't understand character, they don't even talk about character. People say focus on your strengths. That's what a lot of people say who don't understand the power of character. Because your character is either going to minimize or maximize your competency. You can be highly competent, but if you got a weak and poorly developed character, it's not going to do you any good because no one wants to work with you or do business with you or hire you or be around you. That sort of stuff. So there's these two components. You got to know this when you're focusing on growth, when you're focusing on trying to excel at a high level. Relative to your competency, absolutely focus on your strengths. We're going to talk about that later in another step. That's actually going to be step 3. We ain't got to that yet. But relative to what you're good at, get better at being good at the stuff you're good at, because then you can be exceptional. But relative to your character, don't focus on your strengths. Focus on your weakness, because your weaknesses are holding you back like an anchor. Your strengths, your competency, your strengths, even in relative to your character, those things going to launch you like a rocket. Unless you got character weaknesses, because those things are going to hold you back like an anchor. So let's talk about some of these quotes I captured from Andy. And one of them I want to start out with. It's the last one I put in here at the moment. It might not have been the last one, literally, but it's the last one. It's top of my list right here, which means it was the last one went in my quote file. But a lot of times I create memes or picture quotes, whatever you want to call them, and share quotes online. So relative to my files, I shuffle them around. Anyway, that doesn't matter to you. Let's get to this quote by Andy Stanley. He says, renewal of the mind is foundational to character development. I always talk about growth. You always got to be growing. All he did was say it in a different, cooler way. Renewal of the mind. That is growth. That's the kind of growth I'm talking about. The reason I'm sharing this, Ria was talking about the way you think. That's what I shared with you earlier. She was talking about we develop our thought patterns. As we develop our character, we develop our thought patterns and improve the quality of our thinking. That's what made me want to jump to that quote from Andy. Renewal of the mind is foundational to character development. That's what you're doing when you're going through a series like this, listening to a podcast like this, reading books like this. You're being intentional about developing your mind, renewing your mind. You're growing it. So Andy says this. So he says this is a kind of a different topic, but it's still talking about character development. It's not talking about renewal of the mind, right? Not now at the moment. But if you get something out of it relative to you, it is renewal of the mind. So here's the quote. He says, proximity is directly related to conflict. Spend enough time with anyone, and sooner or later, your differences will emerge. You've seen that happen at home and at work. And those differences he's talking about differences related to your character, your values. If you just meet somebody, shake hands, talk to them somewhere, somewhere you just met them, you don't get to know them too well. But if you're around them a lot, like he's saying, proximity, character's going to show up. That's why where you work, unless you're new and it's your first day, if you've been there a while, people know who you are. You know who other people are. And when I'm talking about that, yeah, you know what job they do. You know their competency. But what I'm talking about, and you know this, you know who they are as a person. Their character is what you're talking about. Who somebody is. You've heard me say it a lot about who we are is who we attract. So you want to be engaged with the high performers, you got to have the kind of character of a high performer. I always say you can't climb to the top of the mountain with base camp character. You can't climb to the top of the influence mountain, the influence ladder in this case, the ladder of influence. You can't climb to the top of this ladder with base camp character. You can't climb to the top of that leadership mountain with base camp character. That's my word. The closer we get to someone, the greater the potential for pain, Andy Stanley says. You get close to people, they can hurt you. But guess what else they can do? They can also help you. It's pretty good stuff. All right, so let's talk about another quote from Andy Stanley. Andy says this: "You're not the same person you were yesterday. Whether you sense it or not, you've changed. You've taken a step. You either move closer to or farther away from what you hope to be." That's what's happening. You're changing. Life is changing. People around you are changing. It's constant change all the time. When you become intentional about it, you changing fast. You're definitely not the same person you were yesterday, because you're changing the way you think. You're talking about renewal of the mind, right? Your character's who you truly are. It'll impact how much you accomplish in this life or won't accomplish. It'll make or break every one of your relationships. That right there is what you need to know as you climb through this content. You climb up this ladder of influence. Your character will make or break every one of your relationships. It's key. I want to share another quote from Andy Stanley. I got them just lined up here as I'm talking to you on my quote file, in my quote file. He says, "Your character is more far-reaching than your talent, your education, your background, or your network of friends. Those things can open doors for you. But your character will determine what happens once you pass through those doors." That's pretty powerful right there. Your talent, your education, your background, or your network of friends can open doors. But your character is going to determine what happens once you pass through those doors. When we're talking about leadership, see a lot of people that get promoted into leadership positions. That's the door they walk through. They walk through the leadership door, meaning they're given a formal position of authority, a formal title. They're the boss. Somebody reports to them. But guess what? Guess what determines whether they exceed and excel in that area? Their character. The character is going to determine how they interact with their peers, with their boss, but most importantly, with those people now who are reporting to them. Some people do fine working with their team members, and then they get promoted into a leadership position, and their true character shows up, and then they struggle in that position. A lot of people don't make it. Most of those people get terminated. Most of them don't get slid back into the position where they are. So that they actually lose their job when they get promoted because they don't have the character to actually lead. And they find out people don't have to necessarily do what they're told to do. So let's get back to another quote from Andy. He says, Andy Stanley, "Your character is the internal script that will determine your response to failure, success, mistreatment, and pain." There's so much to character. It impacts every single thing in your life. Your character does. That's why if you want to improve your life, you got to improve your character. Andy says this too. This is a funny little quote from Andy, but he says, "Your good looks and net worth may get you married, but your character will keep you married, or it might get you divorced. It depends on what kind of character you got." Same thing for your spouse. Their character is going to determine if they can stay married or not stay married. But the thing about when you get married is you got the character of two people at play. For you to stay married, you both got to have a high degree of character. Either one of you has a low degree of character, poor character, the marriage probably ain't going to last very long. Maybe you start out strong, then one of you has a lapse of character, makes a bad choice, then the marriage could be over. That could happen at any moment. You can fall off this ladder of influence. Think about a husband and wife. Either one of them can fall off this ladder of influence and lose 100% influence with the other person. And you don't have to lose 100% to get divorced, but if you lose 100%, you most likely going to be divorced. Pretty powerful when you really start thinking about the impact character has on your life. If you don't get nothing out of this series, I hope you get a deeper understanding of why you need to focus on character development. Every book Rhea and I write is focused on helping you develop your character. Every podcast we do, every video course we make. And by the way, I hope you went through that 2-hour free video course, the 5 types of leaders.com, free 2-hour course. Go check it out if you haven't already. But I hope you have. Hope you heard last time. Hope you was listening last time. You went and did that. Give me a shout out on my email or on my cell phone. Text me. Let me know if you enjoyed it. 334-728-4143. Another quote from Andy. He says, "What is true of every living thing is true of your character. Your character is either developing or deteriorating. It is not stagnant. You are not the same person you were yesterday." Man, how about that? I say it kind of in a different way, a simpler way, maybe. I'm kind of simple. We're always either growing or slowing. That's just one way or the other. You know what Andy said right there? It's not stagnant. You're not stagnant as a person. Your character's not stagnant. You're a living being. And that's what I'm saying. You're either growing or slowing. So to be growing, you got to be intentional as you're being right now. Andy says your character, not accomplishments or acquisitions, determines your legacy. And when I talk about legacy, I'm talking about not something you leave for somebody, not money, not a house, not some land, not property, not stuff like that. I'm talking about the legacy you leave, what you leave in someone else. That's the way I interpret that quote from Andy. Your character, not your accomplishments or acquisitions, determine your legacy. Meaning your character is going to determine what you leave within other people. Good stuff or bad stuff. Like since I've grown and developed my character, I touch a lot of people's lives through this podcast, through my time on stage. Rhea and I were just recently in Savannah, Georgia, speaking to about 70 leaders from around the U.S. and Mexico for Pullman services. We met some really, really great people. They were fired up to grow, to develop. I mean, we had a ton of interaction with these folks after we got done speaking. But the point is, because I started growing and developing my character, I'm able to leave a legacy, not for someone, but in someone. People change their lives. I hear their stories. And if you want to hear some of their stories, make sure you go to the Blue Collar Leadership YouTube channel. You want to type it in, it's youtube.com/@ Blue Collar Leadership. And then go to the Real People Getting Real Results playlist. There's 30-something videos on there now where I had some recorded conversations with different people I know all around the country, all different levels and positions. And you can hear them talk about the impact I had on their lives. That ain't why I want you to listen, though, but you'll hear that. But I want to tell you those people are intentionally growing and developing their mind. They're renewing their mind. What you will hear out of all those interviews, conversations, is how they're doing it. Each one of those people are different. But they're focused on renewing their mind. It's obvious. When you listen to them, it's obvious. And they're all different, but they'll all motivate and inspire you. So go check that out. So there's a quote here from Rhea I want to share as we wind up today's episode. And then in the next 4 episodes, we'll be diving into this step, character development, the second step on the ladder of influence. And this is a simple quote from Rhea, But it's one a lot of people don't think about, because a lot of people don't do much time thinking intentionally, because they're being influenced by everything and everyone else in their life. Rhea says this: no one else has as much influence in your life as you do. How about that? No one else has as much influence in your life as you do. That's why I always tell people, if you got a problem in your life, odds are pretty strong you got a solution in your mirror. You are the solution. Stop letting these outside forces control you. You control yourself. You decide where you're going. The hardest person you ever going to lead on this planet is you. Yet you have 100% control and influence over you. 100%. There's nobody else on this planet got that kind of control and influence over you. You're in charge. You're exactly where you're supposed to be based on who you are today. Couldn't be anywhere else. Yes, outside things happen. Those things do not determine us. They influence us. So I hope you got some value out of today's episode. Join me next week, and we're going to start talking about climbing to this step on the ladder of influence, climbing to this character development step. All right? Talk to you next time.
Make it happen, or someone else will. It might as well be you. Are you serious about taking your career and your life to the next level and beyond? Check out Mac Story's Blue Collar Leadership series books and others, now available on audio, along with paperback and ebooks at Amazon and Audible. Please visit bluecollarleadership.com to learn about Mac's books, programs, special offers, and more. Thank you for listening to the Blue Collar Leadership Podcast.